Today I want to show you how to take control over the tonality of your images using the Curves tool. Okay, this is a pretty cool trick you can use on your photos, and it works on just about every style of photo. And what it will allow you to do is sort of rebuild the contrast of your image to make it look more organic, or if you want to add more of a punch to it. And this is a cool trick because you can do it in Lightroom, you can do it in Capture One, you can do it in Luminar, you can do it in Photoshop. But today we're going to look at Lightroom and how to do it really quickly. And the first thing you want to do is you want to strip out all the contrast from your image, because we want to rebuild the contrast with our own curves. And as you can see, this is already a great looking image. This is straight out of camera raw. It's using Adobe Color. It's from the X-T3. The lens is a really good lens for tonality. It's the Mike 35 1.7 very low element lens. So let's start by lowering our highlights, lowering our whites, raising our shadows, and raising our blacks. I usually do the blacks somewhere around 90. And if you do the shadows too high, you're gonna get like a funky HDR look. So you wanna make sure that you still have like a nice look to your image to start from, because this is gonna be like your base that you're working from. So you want it to still have like a nice look, nice natural look to it, but you just wanna get rid of the contrast. So something like that looks pretty good. Next, we want to reduce the vibrance and the saturation, because when you add contrast back into the photos with the curves, it's going to tend to oversaturate things a little bit. And then now what you want to do is you want to add a center point in your curves. And the way the curves work is on the left side you have your shadows, on the right side you have your highlights, and the bottom to the top is the overall value. So if you want things brighter, you move it up. If you want it darker, you move it down. And as you can see in the curves, this background here lines up with your histogram. So you can use your histogram to sort of measure where you're at, right? So we have a lot of midtones here and shadows and not a lot of highlights. And you can see we don't have any points of black and we don't have any points of white, which I think is fine. But if you wanted to add black in, you could move, this point here until you see that hit. See, it peaks right there. See it turn red? So that would mean you have an absolute black point. And the same as with the white, you can move it over till you have an absolute white. So that's something you can do. I'm not going to do that yet. The first thing I want to do is bring back in the contrast. So I usually start by making an S curve. And how deep you go in the shadows is going to depend on how dark you want your blacks or your shadows. And sometimes I like a really dark shadow curve. It has more of like a film look, maybe like a reversal film look to it or something. So you want to adjust the highlights and the shadows, but you also want to watch the transition between the highlights and the shadows, in the skin tones here, because you want that to look really, really smooth and really natural. That's going to make a huge difference. Versus if we go over here to the default image and we try to add contrast this way, you can see it's kind of clipping out our highlights and just crushing out our blacks. Whereas here we have like a really nice, smooth looking image. And you can try to get it back on the original image, by bringing down your whites and your highlights, but you're just never going to have the same amount of control as you would here. So I'm going to bring the shadows a little more down. And then you can move your midpoint once you have everything set up to kind of control that. You do need to be careful that you don't remove too much contrast from certain areas, because it'll tend to make the colors turn gray. Like you will lose your color if you reduce the contrast too much in certain areas. So like, let me show you that. Like right here, you can see her face is losing the colors because there's no contrast there. So you got to make sure you always have nice tones everywhere. Okay, and then from here you can end up bringing back some of your saturation if you want to. Something like in your vibrance. I mean, it's a little too much. Something like that. That looks pretty good. So there you go. I mean, you have like a much nicer, smoother looking skin by using the curves compared to if we were to try to, you know, do it with just these tonal tools up here. You can just get so much more control. And this image is not even like a great example because this image already looked, you know, it looked good straight out of camera. It was like already almost done. But if you ever get those images that are a little bit more challenging, that have, you know, harsh transitions between the highlights and shadows, this is gonna be how you smooth those out. And since we're in the curves tool here, I also want to show you how you can add a little bit of fade. As you can see, we're back having blacks now, even just from bringing the shadows down. And our highlights, we still don't have any white, which is okay. I mean, there's nothing really that should be perfectly white in this shot anyway. But if you want to add a fade, there's two ways to do that, and they have different looks. You want to bring back your shadows up, and then you just disconnect this black point, and then you bring it up. You know, you follow this diagonal line going through the curves, or just move it, you know, to where it needs to be. And this will add like a nice fade, similar to, this is sort of the way the Instagram app does their fade. If you're ever fading Instagram, it's a very almost digital, it just kind of clips everything in the shadows and lifts everything. The other way to do it, I actually like doing it. I actually like doing it this way a lot. I like this look a lot. But the other way is to make sure your black point stays connected to the wall. And this just gives you like a smoother transition into the faded blacks, into the, you know, midtones and everything. And this will give you more of an organic look. And you can actually do the same thing with the highlights if you want to just reduce the dynamic range, the dynamic range of your image and get kind of like a film look. But when you're doing the shadows this way, you do need to watch out that you don't get these little areas that peak underneath where your black point is. Like you can see the shadows here are actually darker than what my black should be. And, you know, to exaggerate, let's see if I can get it. As an exaggeration, you can see that my blacks here are actually brighter than my shadows. So you never want that. You want to always make sure that this goes smoothly into black and nothing dips below the black. And sometimes you can just want maybe a little bit of a fade, not a lot. And so there you go. That's like, this is the way, this is like the best way to add the contrast and adjust the tonality of your image without even getting into dodging and burning or anything else. This is like the best way to start your image. This is like the perfect starting point. And as you can see, this image looks really smooth and really nice and has a great tonality, almost has like a film look to it. There are other ways to do this, which I'll cover in future videos. So if you like this, be sure to subscribe.